Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Young Voices Debates, live in New York City. My name is Hekmat Abu Khater. I'm going to be your moderator tonight. I'm thrilled we have standing room only for this debate. Thank you all for being here. So 6 months ago, I, a Syrian-American libertarian, had the idea of starting this debate society, and now we are going to conclude tonight together our 7th debate. We held 2 virtual and 5 in-person right here in New York City. But this debate society would not have been possible if not for the inspiration I got from the Soho Forum debates. And Gene Epstein, the founder and moderator of the Soho Forum debates, who just celebrated his 100th debate, Oxford-style debate, and his 80th birthday. Thank you, Gene, for the inspiration. Later today, at the conclusion of this debate, Gene will come up and he will make some announcements about the upcoming Soho Forum debates. Hint, hint, one of the debates coming up is with Glenn Greenwald. All right, so let me just mention quickly the sponsors of today's debates. Young Voices, the namesake of our debate society, is a platform that aims to empower young and independent people to share their voices and write and share their experiences on platforms far and wide. Thank you, Young Voices, for your support. And Civil.com, that is CIVL.com. Civil.com is a platform with a mission to become the leading source for ideas that aim to upgrade civilization, for ideas that inspire humanity to explore new ways to organize, thrive by innovating beyond legacy systems. Thank you, Civil and Young Voices, for supporting us. Now, I invite you to take out your phones and scan this QR code here. And as you do so, let me explain to you what the process moving forward looks like. So in an Oxford-style debate, you will get a resolution like this one. Does Trump's America First agenda advance the prosperity, national security, and civil liberties of the American people? You'll get on your phones a question that says, a question that will ask you whether you agree, disagree, or are undecided on the prompt at hand. Please go ahead and vote and give us your opinions. And then at the conclusion of the debate, after you've heard opening statements from the 2 debaters, rebuttals from the 2 debaters, a 40-minute segment of questions and answers in which you guys can come up and ask the debaters questions and ask them to expand upon some ideas. And finally, after 5 minutes of closing remarks, you'll get a second opportunity to express your views on the topic at hand. And the winner of a Soho Forum debate is the person who sways more people to their side after we tabulate the difference between the opening and the pre-debate vote and the post-debate vote. So, as you complete your voting, let me introduce the 2 debaters for tonight. So, for the proposition, arguing that Trump's America First agenda is advancing the national security, the prosperity, and the civil liberties of the American people, we have Ryan Girdusky. Ryan, please come to the stage. Ryan is the author of They're Not, you're right there, Ryan, thank you very much. Ryan is the author of They're Not Listening, the host of A Numbers Game podcast, and the founder of the 1776 Project Political Action Committee. Thank you, Ryan. And for the opposition, if you like, you can take the seat. For the opposition, we have arguing that Trump's America First agenda does not advance American civil liberties, national security, and prosperity. We have Michael Tracey. Michael, please come to the stage. Michael is an award-winning investigative journalist. He is now the main guest host for Glenn Greenwald's System Update show. And the Glenn Greenwald System Update show, a show that he regularly conducts on-the-ground interviews, reporting for. And you can follow his Substack at mtracy.net. Thank you both for being with us tonight. Oh, look at that. Hell yeah. Now, folks, I assume everyone had a chance to vote. If not, raise your hand. Oh, okay, please go ahead and scan your QR code. I believe this is Michael Tracey's mom who's going to do the scan. Okay, please scan the QR. Someone help. As we do that, I want to thank everyone again for attending, and I want to thank all the audience who are with us at civil.com, CIVL.com. Thank you for tuning in at home. And I believe we're all good. So with that, take it away, Michael Tracey. Take it away, Ryan, with your 10-minute opening statement.
Thank you guys all for being here. Thank you for hosting me. I'm arguing in the affirmative that Trump's administration and the Make America Great agenda is, in the first 4 months, this administration has been working to make Americans more prosperous, safe, and free. What I'm not arguing is that the Trump administration has been perfect or there are things that have happened that I disagree with. I'm not looking for an administration that has no flaws. But on the bigger picture of where we are as a country and where our people are going, it is in a positive place. First, on the issue of prosperity, President Trump's critics have argued that his quest to renegotiate America's trade deals and institute blanket tariffs on all the nations of the world would lead us into a second Great Depression that has proven short-sighted at best. Everyone's read or heard about how the stock market became jittery after Liberation Day before picking back up again and ending at their year-to-date numbers, or close to therefore. What hasn't been focused on is the success of the tariffs and President Trump's ability to negotiate with corporate institutions, both foreign and domestic, to benefit and invest in America. A report by the Alliance Global Trade Survey found that 90% of American companies plan on reshoring their industry in order to avoid tariffs. In our long-standing Cold War with China, President Trump's leadership has pushed companies like Intel, General Motors, Whirlpool, and Lockheed Martin to the United States. All told, dozens of companies have announced their plans to invest more than $2 trillion into American industry, American jobs, and not only in places with tremendous growth like Florida and Texas, but places like Louisiana, Michigan, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Central Illinois, and upstate New York. Areas left for dead by the broken and empty ideology of neoliberalism all have a fighting chance because of President Trump's agenda. Places that have been devastated by the neoliberal idea that you could economically and then democratically liberalize China while you devastate the United States is proven unfounded, and it has enriched our primary global adversary. That's all coming to an end. And that's not all. In March, inflation went down by 0.1%, the first time it fell over 5 years, while nominal wages increased by 0.2% from March to April. Egg prices are down, gas is down, wages are up, and consumer confidence is soaring. President Trump has also advanced and mainstreamed the causes of allowing blue-collar workers in the service industry to retain more of their salaries through the no tax on tips, which recently passed the United States Senate by unanimous consent. That was, of course, an idea originated by the libertarian icon and the first man I ever voted for president, Ron Paul. As a result of Trump's economy, sales of new single homes have surged 10.9% month to month, April to March, or March to April rather, 3.3% above the year-to-date expectations. The PMI output index rose to 52.1 in May from 50.6 in April, marking a 2-month high. Analysts surveyed from the Wall Street Journal expected manufacturing to slip back into contraction at 49.8, and service industries actually to go down to 50.6. Both were exceeded. Manufacturing PMI and the Service Business Activity Index rose to 52.3% each respectively. It shows renewed strength and renewed growth in our economy. American consumers are spending more at restaurants, bars, retailers, and on home goods. The economy is stronger despite the fears you were told by people who root against this president and against the American worker. The America First agenda is also making America safer. After years of increasing crime rate initiated by the riots and judicial reform in the post-Ferguson, post-Floyd world, crime is collapsing nationwide. With stability occurring domestically after the fall of the racial reckoning and the push by voters to unseat progressive mayors and district attorneys in San Francisco, Los Angeles, St. Louis, Pittsburgh, Portland, Chicago, Houston, Milwaukee, Boston, Tampa, and Loudoun County, Virginia, President Trump has reignited efforts to bring peace abroad and, most importantly, protect the American borders from the worst invasion from our country since the War of 1812. During President Biden's leadership, more than 14 million people, between known gotaways, border apprehensions, and the ridiculous CHNV scam program, entered our country, and the illegal alien population grew by more than 4 million people, enforcing American sovereignty and the right to defend our borders and make the conditions for who lives in our country is of the utmost importance. While we're early into President Trump's administration, the numbers of known gotaways and border apprehensions have decreased by over 95%, and we're seeing the lowest level of daily apprehensions at the border in 15 years. Even though immigration isn't directly the topic being discussed, it is the most important issue facing our country today. There are millions of reasons why Trump's mass deportation effort is a good thing, and we are lucky enough to have a president to take on this Herculean task, but I'll specifically focus on crime. According to the most recent numbers from DHS, from January 20th to April 29th, ICE arrested 49,847 illegal aliens with a known criminal record. This includes 9,639 assaults, 6,398 DWIs or DUIs, 1,479 weapons offenses, almost 2,300 gang members, 1,300 accused of sex offenders, nearly 500 murderers, and almost 40 suspected terrorists or known terrorists. Tens of thousands of people who had no right to be in this country and have used the weak border policies of past administrations to prey on vulnerable Americans, many of whom are recent immigrants themselves. President Trump also signed an executive order to tackle human smuggling, designated the Mexican drug cartel, who is responsible for more deaths of Americans than the Civil War, as an international terrorist organization, and relaunched an effort to target online sex trafficking, resulting in over 200 arrests in the month of April alone, including high-profile cases on the dark web. President Trump's efforts to secure our border and hold cartel members accountable has led to a massive downturn in the underground economy of human smuggling. Human smugglers under Joe Biden's presidency were raking in between $4 to $12 billion annually, about the GDP of Somalia. NBC News reported that under President Trump's policies controlling the border and deporting criminal aliens, their profits have fallen by 80% in the first 3 months alone. Now, lastly, on civil liberties, possibly the most controversial, and the controversial take I'll say is that President Trump is one of the great civil libertarian presidents of our lifetime. Growing up as a millennial, I understood the Republican Party to be an institution set on monitoring how people conducted their personal lives in the bedroom. President Bush caused irreparable damage between my generation and the GOP over his efforts to institute a nationwide gay marriage ban and abortion ban. President Trump not only reset the Republican Party's long and outdated refusal to recognize marriage between consenting adults, but elevated an openly gay man to the fifth in line for the presidency without any controversy or identity politics. True equality is where a man's merit and ability to carry out the president's agenda are all that matters. Scott Bissett is a gay man, and unlike Pete Buttigieg or Rick Grenell, no one cares. He's not a mascot, and that's good for our country and who we are as a nation. Likewise, the success of the Supreme Court to return abortion back to the states as originally interpreted by our nation's founders was not met with a push by the executive branch to create another nationwide standard. President Trump's willingness to let states be the laboratories of democracy is inherently good for our republic, and even when I don't agree with how states are operating, I have the ability to vote with my feet and live in places that I agree with. All past presidents have refused to acknowledge those ideas of our founders. President Trump also signed an executive order on his first day of administration to reinstate all active reserve and active military members discharged solely for refusing to take the COVID-19 vaccine. President Biden had 8,000 service members dismissed because of the refusal to take the shot. President Trump acknowledged their bodily and religious autonomy and worked to repair the damage that the last administration had done to service members' civil liberties. And lastly, I need to mention one of the most crucial fights of civil liberties that President Trump's actions to crack down on government-funded institutions that discriminate upon applicants based on race. Since the Supreme Court ruled in Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard, many universities had gone out of their way to continue to discriminate against white and Asian applicants. He's gone a step further by opening civil rights investigations against the city of Chicago, whose mayor stated that they were engaging in racial discrimination when it came to hiring and giving promotions. 2 days ago, the New York Times printed a story to that their horror, President Trump believes civil rights also belong to white men. Now, the great debate over civil liberties in our government is surveillance. I understand that this is an issue that I and libertarians probably mostly agree on, and I'd hope that President Trump would reduce the scope of government intervention in that area. I will credit President Trump on something, however. Unlike all other recent modern presidents, Obama, Bush, and Biden, President Trump has not increased the surveillance state to beyond their predecessors. He has not pressured social media companies to withhold information and censor stories. The Make America Great agenda and President Trump's second term presents the greatest opportunity for peace, prosperity, and security in our time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Michael, I think that your mic is right here. Here we go. If you want to stand, you can do that. All right,
Are we
take it
good?
away, Michael. Your 10-minute opening
I'm going to
statement.
stand for emphasis. All right, so let me first stipulate that I like to think I am not afflicted by what's sometimes known as Trump derangement syndrome, but so too have I tried to inoculate myself from a lesser known variant known as Trump devotion syndrome, and I admit it can be a tricky balance to strike. I'm one of the very few people with any media adjacency at all who from the outset challenged the spurious premises behind the so-called Russiagate narrative that dominated the entire first Trump presidency, which, as you might recall, posited that Trump was colluding with the Russian state and was sinisterly controlled by Vladimir Putin and so forth. I was a critic of both impeachments of Donald Trump. I was constantly berated that I didn't understand that January 6th was like 9/11 times the Civil War times Pearl Harbor, etc. I closely covered all 4 prosecutions of Donald Trump when he was out of office and criticized all 4 for being specious in various respects and also even pernicious. I should also probably acknowledge that, if I'm being honest, I would probably take the oppositional motion for this debate for whomever administration was in power, because I guess I'm just kind of oppositional by nature, and I have an incorrigible, quote-unquote, contrarian disposition. But leaving that aside, don't take anything that I argue tonight, or don't construe it as any sort of endorsement of the prior administration, any sort of rehabilitation of the Democrats, who still have a lot of work cut out for them to explain why they essentially covered up a president in accelerating states of cognitive decrepitude, and on and on and on. So now to the substance. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't start by dwelling on for a moment the very first major foreign policy proposal that Donald Trump announced in his second term. This was in the first week of February. Of course, who else did Donald Trump invite for his first visit with a major foreign leader but Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel? And out of the blue, seemingly, Donald Trump announced that the United States would, quote, take over Gaza, the besieged, war-torn territory that's currently being annihilated with U.S. munitions that Donald Trump accelerated the provision of to Israel. Now, a lot of people dismissed this at the time as a joke or just like one of Trump's typical negotiating gambits, but as the months have ensued, the proposal has only gotten all the more serious. Netanyahu and his government, full of messianic fanatics, have explicitly stated that they're integrating Trump's proposal into their war plans for Gaza. It is one of the conditions required for them to achieve in order to secure victory. So that's the Israeli government working in conjunction with Donald Trump to say that the United States will somehow be party to the mass expulsion of, and we're supposed to believe, or we're supposed to be going to the Gulf states last week or earlier this month. Writers give him a speech where influence of neocons, quote unquote, or people who are obsessed with, quote, nation building. And he's supposed to be this clean break from the past. Meanwhile, on that very same trip, he goes to Qatar and says, yeah, we're still taking over Gaza and expelling all the Palestinians and turning it into some kind of U.S. military protectorate. If you think that your quote-unquote national security is enhanced by the United States becoming the governing authority by military rule in a besieged, war-torn territory in the Middle East, and that's not going to result in blowback, then maybe you should familiarize yourself with the concept of blowback, because it might be illuminating for you. Israel is currently annihilating Gaza. Don't take it from me. Ehud Olmert, the former prime minister of Israel, published a column in Haaretz last week saying that this is a war of annihilation that's being subsidized, armed, and facilitated by the current administration. This after Donald Trump came into office being heralded for having supposedly obtained a ceasefire in Gaza that he then proceeded to systematically undermine in concert with the Israeli government to therefore empower Netanyahu to launch his annihilation offensive at will with no constraints whatsoever. He even saw fit to remove what meager restrictions or limitations the Biden administration had placed on the provision of armaments to Israel in the form of heavy munitions. Then let's get to Ukraine very briefly, because this is something that I've covered for many years now. Donald Trump, from the very moment he started running for president, said that he was going to end the Ukraine war in 24 hours. He actually said he was going to somehow end it as president-elect, so before even assuming office on January 20th. Now he's revised the claim. He was saying, now he claims that he was sarcastic when he made that pledge over and over again incessantly, or he was using flowery figurative language to get everybody excited about his peacemaking prowess. I know we're supposed to take Trump seriously, but not literally, but at a certain point, that becomes a cop-out to hold the president accountable for a single word that comes out of his mouth. Just this past week, or just in the past few days, Trump is now like blurting out Truth Social posts saying, Vladimir Putin has gone absolutely crazy. Maybe we will actually sanction their oil sector or something extreme, or even some more ominous escalations that he's not going to specify, but could easily lurch the world closer to World War II, which is precisely what Trump campaigned on, him being the sole option to avoid the World War III outcome, not World War II. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee last week, and he made a very illustrative clarification as to what the current U.S. policy is with respect to Ukraine. He confirmed that the U.S. policy of provisioning weapons to Ukraine and of sanctioning Russia is, as of May 2025, totally unchanged from what it was under the previous Biden administration. Now, if I had asked you before the election in November of last year, would you be surprised if by May of 2025, Donald Trump's administration was continuing identical policies from the previous Biden administration with respect to arming and funding Ukraine and sanctioning Russia? I think a lot of people would have been surprised, both opponents and supporters of Trump alike. But they really shouldn't have been that surprised, because if you have a little bit of discernment and you followed the actual record of the first Trump administration, you'll know that he continues to brag to this day, and so do his Republican allies, that he was extraordinarily tough on Russia. Yes, I will credit Trump for doing the bare minimum of reopening diplomatic contacts with the world's leading nuclear superpower, that being the Russian Federation, but that's a rather low bar to clear. As far as civil liberties, RFK Jr. and the podcaster clique that kissed his ass for like a year and a half and then used him to funnel disoriented, sort of apolitical people into the Republican Party fold told us that in order to restore free speech in America, we had to restore Republican executive power. Then what did the Republicans do once they regained executive power? They launched the most sweeping crackdown on political speech that virtually anybody can remember. By the way, it's speech that's critical of Israel that they deem anti-Semitic, and they're using the full force of the federal apparatus to crack down and stifle and penalize speech that they dislike. A top DOJ official named Leo Terrell said that the DOJ is currently aligned toward the objective of, quote, eradicating anti-Semitism in America. It's a mirror image of the woke DEI people who claim that they could eradicate any other societal ill like bigotry, racism, transphobia, using the force of the state, but now this is the muscular Republican version, and it's supposed to be under the aegis of restoring free speech, which is ridiculous. Last thing on prosperity, which is the final component of the proposition we're asked to comment on. Allow me to give a brief anecdote. I spoke to an administration official, who I can't name, not too long ago, and I asked him a very simple question. What is the objective of the tariff policy that Trump has introduced with his Liberation Day antics and his constant oscillating back and forth between various perspectives on how this is supposed to culminate? And he said, it depends on who you ask. he didn't have the faintest clue about what the objective was, because they're all like us. They're looking at the man at the top for any tea leaves they can read, any like irregularly capitalized social post that they can interpret with Talmudic intensity, and that's it. So even if you're like generally in favor or open-minded to protectionist economic policy, as I generally have been, putting like faith-based conviction in the supreme negotiating prowess of one man probably is not the most reliable way to get those potentially beneficial economic policies enacted.
Thank you very much, Michael. Ryan, you get for your Ryan, for your rebuttal, you get 20 extra seconds, because 12 extra seconds, because Michael went over.
Worth it. 12. I can't even.
Do with them whatever you want.
I'm from New York. I can't get through anything in 12 seconds.
All right, you have 5 minutes plus 12. Go ahead. Rebuttal.
There's a lot with that Michael said that I agree with fundamentally. I don't think that the moving of people from Gaza is a good thing. I don't think that we should open up Trump estates via the Gaza Strip. There are some things I think that Michael said, however, were hyperbolic. So first being the funding of Ukraine. When you're entering negotiations with Vladimir Putin, one, you're in probably the most intense and hard negotiations there is. Vladimir Putin has an understanding that certain territories of the Ukrainian state belong to Ukraine, and you have Vladimir Zelensky sitting there and saying, no, we need Crimea back. It is almost untenable. So to turn and sit there and say, we're going to pull all armaments and all funding back from Ukraine in the meantime really puts the lever on one person. You don't do that while you're in midst of negotiations. I will say, to Trump's credit, although it has not been perfect, obviously not a day one thing, and it has been a massacre, President Trump has at least gotten the Ukrainians and Russians to the table. They've at least sat there and had conversations about it. Where they will end up is who knows. But the problem is we have partners in Europe who are extraordinarily insincere about their commitment to Ukraine. Because while they're sitting there and saying we support Ukraine, one, they're not funding their own military to the NATO standards, but two, they keep buying Russian oil. So it is a complete joke to sit there and to say that we are it's a lot of people who have came of age in the 1950s and 1960s, no shame to boomers, they live in a fantasy of a world, of a post-World War II world that doesn't exist anymore. This is idea that the UK and the United States and France and Italy, when they're feeling like it, have this immense ability to sit there and have massive governing abilities over the entire world is delusional. It's just not the case and not how it's been. Now, Ukraine has a fundamental demographic problem. They're running out of bodies to throw at this Russian military. Anything that you could do to accelerate peace negotiations is a positive in this case, but you cannot do that so long as you're pulling back support for the Ukrainian military when they're at their weakest in many respects. When it comes to the cracking down on the media, I don't really know what Michael was saying, because President Obama arrested journalists. President Biden sat there and made social media not promote stories that they thought was against his agenda with the COVID-19 vaccine. President Bush was very, very had allies within the entire media, like the New York Times and the Atlantic, who were promoting actively the war in Iraq and silencing opposition. President Trump, I mean, you could say many things, but there are, outside of a few channels or people on social media, very few people sit there and openly sit there and support him. I do agree with Michael. What Michael said is correct, that being a never Trumper is delusional, but being an always Trumper, I forget what you said, but always Trumper is how I say it. Always Trumper is also delusional, and it's not coherent and not accurate. But to sit there and say that President Trump is sitting there as the voice against the media, I don't think is accurate to the last four administrations we've had in this country. President Bush was no friend to the media and certainly worked to sit there and gin up support for the Iraq War. Certainly President Obama had arrested journalists, and President Biden silenced stories. So I don't feel like that is where it's at. I understand your energy and your enthusiasm and your passion on the issue of Palestinian people. It is a tremendously complicated and hard time. However, with all due respect, my opinion is that I really want to focus on Americans right now. I understand that it's complicated. I understand there's people all over the world suffering. I understand we have a giant footprint and we are the world's global superpower, world's policeman, and we shouldn't be in that position. But so long as we are, and we've only been there President Trump's only been for the first 4 months, we have to sit there and say, what is he doing for Americans now? And on the subject of Americans and America being America first, President Trump in 4 months has done a damn good job. And I'll leave it there, so.
Thank you, Ryan. As Michael stands up and gets ready for his rebuttal, just remind the 4,000 watching online on Civil to ask questions, and everyone here to start thinking of questions and start lining up once his rebuttal is concluded. Take it away for your 5-minute rebuttal. Thank you.
Well, I first want to thank Ryan for giving the MAGA case for arming Ukraine. Weirdly, that was absent from the entirety of the 2024 campaign. It would have been nice to hear that argument made to voters so they could evaluate whether they wanted that policy to continue while in office rather than giving the diametric opposite impression, which is not uncommon for politicians, but Trump is seen to kind of float above the ordinary fray of politicking and somehow exempted from ordinary scrutiny. He mentioned that I said that Trump was victimizing the media. I don't think I ever mentioned the word media. I was referring to the intergovernmental crackdown that was ushered in by the Trump administration as one of the few policies that the administration or all factions therein seem to be actually unified on. They know they're unified against anti-Semitism, which means, among other things, telling universities, which, I mean, I'm not going to die on the hill of like being a martyr for Columbia University or anything, but even if you want to take the Ivy Leagues down a peg, really you're going to send these like endless parade of threat letters saying that in order to satisfy the administration, what you really have to do is impose new hate speech codes that utilize this new definition of anti-Semitism that includes using unfair criticisms essentially against Israel. That means you're anti-Semitic and you're subject to state punishment. That's how RFK Jr. and this other clique said that they were going to restore free speech for Americans because they're so fond of the First Amendment. And if you want to focus on Americans, you should tell the Trump administration. They're the ones that are supplying our taxpayer-funded munitions to Israel for use in what the Israeli government explicitly and overtly says is a campaign to, quote, conquer Gaza, and what the former prime minister says is a campaign to annihilate Gaza. So if you'd rather us not focus on that because it's inconvenient, that I can understand because it might not be that great for your argument, but we're reacting to what the current government policy is, and the current government policy is presided over by Donald J. Trump. In his opening remarks, he mentioned the administration's record on immigration, and I want to address that briefly because I think it's prudent that whatever one's personal views about immigration, let's say one is generally in favor of liberalized immigration policy or generally in favor of more restrictionist policy, what's clear is that the electorate has signaled that they were clamoring for a more restrictionist immigration policy. So I have nothing in principle against a new administration executing on that agenda to some degree. When that becomes, oh, by the way, we have to establish a random new penal colony in El Salvador, and we're going to deport with no due process. We're proud of bragging that there was no due process whatsoever, even to check if the people in question that we're deporting were illegally in the United States or committed any crimes. We're just going to haul them off to this new penal colony in El Salvador. That's when the civil liberties encroachment comes in, and it goes well beyond simply enacting the democratic will around immigration policy. Here's what Ross Douthat, New York Times columnist, granted, but somebody who J.D. Vance thinks highly enough of that he gives regular interviews to and has colloquies with. Here's how he described it, quote, and this was him talking to J.D. Vance directly when he was interviewing or bantering with him at the Vatican recently, quote, there are elements of what you might call a kind of war on terror mentality that you're taking vis-a-vis the cartels or people associated with the cartels or people allegedly associated with gangs and cartels that seems to me similar to the approach taken to anyone associated with Islamic terrorism and so on in the aftermath of September 11th. So if you want to import and even make more extreme in certain respects the legal architecture of the war on terror in order to implement a more restrictionist immigration policy, that's where I have to maybe politely object. Because for all that Trump and his associates decided or determined or figured out last fall that they could make a big political piñata out of Dick and Liz Cheney because they had fallen out of her favor with the Republican Party and most Americans. And so they were chastising the Cheneys and claiming that they were going to inaugurate or usher in this new era of some kind of national conservatism that left the Cheneys in the past. And then to resuscitate the worst excesses of the Bush and Cheney administration in terms of abrogating civil liberties is a big irony, and not just because of whatever harm it may not or may do to the individual people who are subjected to those civil liberties abridging policies, but because it corrodes the constitutional order writ large. A lot of people recognize this in the early 2000s when it was Bush and Cheney doing it, but if it's Trump and Vance doing it, we're all supposed to think that, I don't know, it's all about restoring American greatness.
You get 6 seconds, Ryan. Thank you both for your opening statements and for your rebuttals. And at this point, please start lining up for your questions to ask Michael and Ryan if you have any thoughts or anything you want to examine further. I'll start with inviting the two debaters to ask each other a question as per our tradition. Michael or Ryan, whoever wants to take it away, you can start it off.
Okay, so Ryan, just on the issue of Ukraine, which, look, there's a lot of issues we could potentially talk about with respect to any administration, and we're all going to have different areas of focus, so I don't necessarily even begrudge you for not focusing on this issue as much as you might others. However, you will agree that Trump, over and over and over again, at debates, in speeches, in town hall meetings, everywhere he could, interviews, said that he was going to end the Ukraine war in 24 hours. Now, even if you interpreted that with some degree of allowance for it being an exaggeration or truthful hyperbole, as Trump wrote in Art of the Deal, in terms of his rhetorical style, how is it that we're supposed to hold him to account for his campaign promises, just as I would have wanted to hold it to account Joe Biden, Barack Obama, George W. Bush, or anybody else? Explain that to me, and I know it's a long question, but do you agree with me that a lot of people would have been surprised, wrongly in my estimation, but I was in the minority, if you had told them in October of 2024 that by May of the next year, Trump would be continuing the same arms provision and sanctions regime policies with respect to the Ukraine conflict as the Biden administration?
That's a really good question. I think that for the Trump administration, for President Trump himself, rhetoric really does have a lot to do with it. And on the idea of rhetoric, unlike President Biden and unlike most leaders in Western Europe, Donald Trump has not said, let's continue this war till Ukraine wins. He has sat there and said, the war must end on the conditions of possibly ceding territory and having the condition of NATO be in Ukraine joining NATO. That has not shifted whatsoever in the conversation, and I hold that him to accountable. Now, what Vladimir Putin chooses to do and what Zelensky chooses to do, he really doesn't have the ability to do it unless you want a forceful action on the part of the United States, which I don't believe you want. I don't want it. But at this point in mid-negotiations, when you're sitting there and saying, what territory would you secede? Which would Ukraine join NATO? Would there be a conversation over anything? You don't sit there and then pull the rug from the Ukrainians mid-conversation. I wish this conversation had ended earlier. I wish that Putin would have sat there and said, we have the 3 territories we want. Let's call it a day and pack it in. Ukraine and Russia are facing a demographic whiteout. I mean, it's going to be a population loss never seen before in Western civilization. No one can understand what's happening to both the Ukrainian people and the Russian people at this very moment. At the same exact time, when it comes in respect to Ukraine, I think that President Trump believed it would be like a Ronald Reagan situation where he would get sworn into office and they would release in the case of Reagan, release our political prisoners. That obviously didn't happen. Trump's foreign policy is a madman foreign policy. No one knows what he's going to do. Thus, 4 people are scared of him. I don't, and I think that Putin definitely was a little scared from the first term. I don't know if he is midway through a war. Putin also has the problem right now where the New York Times did a great reporting of like 50 different Russian soldiers who said if Putin were to surrender right now, it would be a huge betrayal, and the military would have a problem with Putin. We are in a horrendously bad situation on the eastern front of Ukraine, and I don't know how you untangle that, but I don't believe it's by pulling everything out 5 months into negotiations, though I do hope that there is a very quick end to this war.
Ryan, do you have a question for Michael?
Yeah, so you mentioned the immigration policies with the deportation stuff. A lot of the questions of President Trump's executive orders and executive actions has been held up in this court, specifically by the 655 district court judges. We, as a nation, do not have a long-standing history of district court judges acting on and putting in nationwide injunctions to halt presidential action. We had a dozen in the first 175 years of our country. President Franklin Roosevelt, whose New Deal was broadly considered against the Constitution, had no nationwide injunctions by district court judges. Is it your perception that the president has to govern along with the consent of 655 district court judges to enact a policy to remove people who are wrongfully here?
Not necessarily. However, if you're going to invoke the Alien Enemies Act for the first time since World War II and for only the fourth time in U.S. history, with each time before, each of the 3 times before being in an actual war context, meaning world wars or the War of 1812, if you're going to claim that the political and security context of 2025 is analogous to 1945, then you should expect some challenges to potentially be in the offing. So no, I'm not going to necessarily give you a principled defense of nationwide injunctions in every respect, but if they're going to just run rampant over any modicum of due process and then complain that they're victimized when, for the most part, Republican judges, maybe not for the most part, but to a large degree, Republican judges, including many that Trump himself appointed, say that, hey, hold on a minute, we're not trying to impede in totality your ability to deport unlawful aliens through the ordinary process. However, if you're going to invoke this spectacularly unusual wartime law that has within it the premise that there's an invasion, meaning a state-directed invasion, which they're claiming is from Venezuela, as though Venezuela even has the basic state capacity to like invade Colombia or something, then no, I'm not surprised that there are court challenges associated with that. I'll just quote Antonin Scalia quickly, who I assume now will be denounced as a rhino or establishment squish who's trying to sabotage MAGA. He said, quote, "It is well established that the Fifth Amendment entitles aliens to due process of law in deportation proceedings." So if you disagree with that, if you think that the case law should just be overturned completely because we have to use this obscure and anachronistic statute to deport people as expeditiously as possible, okay, but like realize that you're not just arguing against some left-wing sort of interlocutor that you've invented. This is like a standard tenet, basically, of conservative legal philosophy. But even when Trump's own Supreme Court appointees, Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, and Barrett, issued a rather tepid opinion saying that the administration must adhere to at least a bare minimum of due process protections, what happened? They were denounced as somehow looking to sabotage MAGA. So that's my answer.
All right, thank you very much. And again, folks online, send us your questions, and I'll ask my question really quickly, and then we'll start taking from the audience. So Ryan, a point that I wanted you to focus on that Michael kind of mentioned. So the Trump administration under RFK, they're considering anti-Semitism to be a pandemic, and they are trying to impose the IHRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Coalition's adoption or understanding of anti-Semitism, which essentially classifies any criticism of Israel as anti-Semitic. We see that not too far from here, Colombia's Department of Middle Eastern Studies is under custodianship from of the White House, just because they have some research and some scholarship that could be deemed anti-Israel in any sense. So how is that in any way advancing civil liberties of the American people?
So in many cases that where executive action has been taken on the part of schools, their anti-Semitism has been one factor of many. So in the case of Harvard, DEI was also a factor. In the case of Columbia, I forget what the factor was, but it was not. I have never seen a case where anti-Semitism was the only factor listed in the university system. I am somebody who genuinely believes you can be critical of Israel without being anti-Semitic. However, what we are seeing right now is a clear link between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, to the point where there is a genuine fear among a Jewish population of being harmed, of being threatened, of being pushed out of school. I don't know when you're at. It's such a small, concentrated group of areas with a small, concentrated group of people that I don't see how federal action in some capacity to protect those people who genuinely fear being harmed, who in several cases have been harmed. There was bricks being thrown at them or stones being thrown at one university. They had to lock themselves in the library. I believe it was at Columbia. At another university, we saw in front of the Israeli embassy 2 people being murdered in cold blood as they screamed "Free Palestine." You can criticize the Israeli government. If someone were to sit there and say, from the Columbia School in Arab Studies, criticize Netanyahu's takeover of the Supreme Court, or whatever happened to the Supreme Court a couple of years ago, there's not an ounce of anti-Semitism in that. At this point, though, they chose to do it after October 7th. Like, it was specific, and I understand the concerns of the Palestinian people. I know Palestinian Christians who have relatives in the area, and it's been detrimental and devastating to them. I understand the idea of wanting to protect them. I find it a little confusing for many of these people who espouse the need to scream genocide, that there's no conversation with them about Sudan, South Sudan, nothing about Yemen, nothing about, I mean, half of those universities would host a Turkish president that has denied Armenian genocide. So give me a break.
Michael, a quick comment?
Yeah, first of all, there's no dearth, I'm going to stand again because that's my habit so far. There is no dearth of criminal statutes that police can use to prosecute people who legitimately assault Jewish students, vandalize property, etc. This intergovernmental initiative goes well beyond any of that. It specifically is meant to penalize and stifle the speech that has no component or connection necessarily to any violent action or any harassing action. What they do is say, we're actually going to adopt this like woke worldview that we pretended to denounce for the past 10 years and say that if an individual student claims that they are somehow harmed or hurt or disturbed by the expression of a certain kind of speech, then that entitles them to redress by the state, and the Trump administration is going to provide that redress at full steam. You know, just to give a little bit of context on this, I think kind of ties the whole issue together from a historical perspective, is that there is an infamous tweet that Donald Trump sent in, I believe it was October of 2015, when he mocked Marco Rubio at the time, who's now his Secretary of State, for being molded into, quote, the perfect little puppet of Sheldon Adelson, who is at that time the biggest pro-Republican megadonor in the country, more or less, and whose singular issue was being a fanatical pro-Israel advocate. Now his widow, Miriam Adelson, is also one of Trump's biggest funders, and Trump, you know, to his credit, unlike most politicians, will be very overt in saying that he just does stuff because he's willing to do a quid pro quo with people who fund his campaign and his legal expenses and so forth. And one of the big asks by the Republican donor class is to crack down on these woke universities by inverting the whole woke paradigm and using it to like defend the honor or the safety of Jewish students, where they just got done ridiculing anybody from any other identity class who would invoke similar arguments for why they warranted these individualized or state-enforced protections.
Thank you very much. Michael, a quick question for you. So it is true, considering what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in Gaza, but let's take the situation in Iran. So Steve Witkoff just concluded the 4th round of negotiations in Oman with the Iranians, with Araghchi. We see now that Steve Witkoff is potentially reaching some sort of agreement with the Iranians. There's some opening for a civilian nuclear program, which is essentially all the Iranians are asking for now. And we also see that Mike Waltz got kicked out. Mike Waltz, who is the most neocon-y out of all of the people who are leading in Trump's administration. How is that not potentially advancing the American national security?
Well, why was Mike Waltz picked in the first place? This was supposedly after Trump had triumphed over the dastardly neocons that are really just a bogeyman that he can use as a deflection talking point. After the 2024 election, he had the most political capital he's ever had in his entire career to pick whomever he wanted, particularly for the position of National Security Advisor, which doesn't even require Senate confirmation. He picked the most hardcore, quote-unquote, neocon, or one of them anyway, in the entire House of Representatives. And now, yeah, they've shunted him off to the UN. But, why was he picked in the first place if we're supposed to be transcending the depredations of the neocon consensus? On Iran, I think you do slightly mischaracterize what the trajectory of these negotiations potentially are. It is true that Steve Witkoff, the special envoy that's been nominated for negotiating with Russia, with Hamas, with Iran, big portfolio, no doubt, has been treated to all these hagiographies about he's bringing a breath of fresh air from the real estate sector, and he has this close personal bond with Trump, and therefore we should be really impressed that he's defying the odds in terms of his negotiating tactics. However, if you'll notice, Witkoff, when he's asked to comment publicly on what the conditions from the U.S. are as to what a acceptable resolution would be on Iran, he initially did say, kind of vaguely, yes, there could be an enrichment threshold at 3.67%, I believe it was, that could be tolerable, meaning Iran would not have to capitulate to the most maximalist demands and totally dismantle its entire nuclear arsenal, which everybody who's followed this issue for the past 15 or 20 years knows is a complete non-starter for Iran. It would be seen as a national humiliation, and they probably would rather go to war, or at least many of them would, than give in to that demand from who they view as this imperial state on the other side of the world, meaning the United States. However, as the clamor grew, and as Senate Republicans insinuated themselves into the administration's sort of policymaking process, Witkoff has adopted the maximalist prescriptions relative to Iran that are touted by both the hardline Senate Republicans and also Israeli officials who don't want negotiations. Rather, they want to use negotiations as a pretext so that when they inevitably fail because the maximalist demands could never be accepted by Iran, the administration can then say, oh, look, we tried to negotiate, but they were too intransigent. Therefore, either we're going to bomb Iran or we're going to sort of enable Israel to bomb Iran in an ancillary support role. So Witkoff said that the, quote, red line for Iran is zero enrichment. That's what he made a point to go on national television to repeat. And it did seem to derail negotiations. Now, who knows exactly what will happen if they do agree to a settlement whereby Iran is permitted to continue a certain level of enrichment. It will certainly be ironic that in the first Trump administration, Trump decided to withdraw from the JCPOA, or the Obama-era nuclear deal, precisely because he said it was totally intolerable that it permitted any enrichment. But then he's going to claim the credit for that, whereas we could have had the same framework as of 2018.
All right, thank you. Do you have a quick comment, Ryan?
Yeah, a quick response is this is the same administration that hired Tulsi Gabbard. J.D. Vance is the vice president. I say it's the most anti-war vice president of my entire lifetime. And the fact that he came from the Republican Party is, I mean, it's laughable that Mike Waltz's 60-day stint is tantamount to being a controversy. This administration has moved tremendously, and Steve Witkoff has been slandered by Mark Levin. He's been slandered by the New York Post. Every corner of neoconservatives in this country who even have a soapbox to stand on have sat there and condemned him for not being pro-Israel enough or to being too supportive of the Iranian administration.
All right, thank you both. Let's start with the audience questions. Please keep them brief and only one question, and no need to introduce yourself. Please take it away.
Okay. So my question to Ryan is, as long as Trump continues to take any of the American taxpayer dollars to foreign nations, while a single American is in need, can you actually say that he's America first?
That's a great question. So comes to the idea of, is there something called soft power? Could the administrative state and the federal and the foreign policy use our giving slight money in order to win favorability on behalf of foreign countries who otherwise would be hostile? I think it's a question of cost benefit to it. I think of, would it be? It's like, a perfect example is when Trump offered the $1,000 to deport illegal aliens to self-deport. Why would you give an illegal alien money after committing a crime? That's outrageous. However, it is extraordinarily cheaper than having to go through the court process over 10 years to deport an illegal alien. I think it's a question of how much they're spending, where they're spending, and what they're spending on. In some cases, soft power does work. In other cases, I think it doesn't work. I think we've spent too much money in some corners of the world. So I think it's an as-case basis. But overall, yeah, for an American first policy, I don't think that any foreign aid period would deter from not being pro-America first.
Michael, would you like to comment on the same question?
Well, America first can really mean anything. That's the genius of this branding exercise that the Republican Party writ large has engaged in, prompted by Trump. You can have Lindsey Graham going on the floor of the Senate and saying it's America first to oppose the mullahs in Iran, and Israel's an extension of the United States, and therefore we must shower them with all the armaments that they could ever possibly dream of, and that's America first, because what's the definition of America first, really? If you look back into history, you could say that it's associated with some more thoroughgoing form of isolationism or whatnot, but the first Trump administration was not, quote, isolationist in any real meaningful respect, and yet they still waved the banner of America first, and everybody just sort of bought into it because it was a nice little slogan for people to rally around, and that's what politicians like, to have simplified slogans around which they can rally. I would similarly ask, is it America first to, within like 2 months, decide that you're going to start bombing Yemen and say, oh, we're going to show how Biden, what a wuss he was, because we're really going to go hard after Yemen, and we're going to show that we don't take any crap anymore in this new Trump, Pegstaff, Vance administration, as though Vance is like this big non-interventionist ideologue, which I also find to be a joke given his record. And then within 6 weeks, after basically annihilating Yemen day after day, say, oh, we're now going to abort the mission and claim victory after spending who knows how many billions of dollars, after like F-16s slid off the deck of the warships that they were docked on. And yeah, everybody just kind of celebrates as America first. So I guess that would be my response.
Next question, please.
Hi.
No, can you just start
No.
from the beginning of the line? Yeah. Go ahead. Oh, you were in line. Sorry, I thought you got. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the Trump administration has chosen to use anti-Semitism rather than anti-whiteness as the tip of the spear against schools. One reason may be is because the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment and the Civil Rights Act Title VI, which controls for schools, doesn't protect against religious discrimination. It's only for race and national origin. So the question of what's anti-Semitism, what definition we should use, whether it's Trump's expansive definition or some other definition, it really cloaks a much more controversial question, which is what's a Jewish person? What's Jewishness?
Is that your question?
Is it a religion? Is it an ethnicity? Is it a national origin?
Let's just get to the question.
So I guess that's the question.
Okay.
What is a Jewish person?
Do you understand the question?
Not really.
Could you very briefly just re-summarize just the question part, please?
So Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which prevents discrimination in schools, doesn't prevent discrimination based on religion. And Trump's definition determines.
I think
that
I got it.
it's
I think I got it.
I think I get the gist of
Okay.
it. Look,
Thank you very much.
We could have a big intellectual exercise for maybe the next 16 hours straight over the identity category of a Jewish person versus a white person, and to what extent either category ought to be or is entitled to certain protections under the law. However, it's kind of immaterial because the object of this policy is totally obvious. Now, the purveyors of the policy want us to believe that after October 7th, 2023, there was just this organic and random and terrifying outburst of anti-Semitism that had nothing to do with the fact that Israel proceeded to obliterate Gaza incessantly, and it was just about everybody just realizing that they had this deep-seated animus for Jews when they were obviously reacting to the actions of the Israeli state and the actions of the United States in subsidizing the Israeli state. I'm not denying that on the fringes or on the margins, of course, there are people who do actually harbor anti-Semitic views. My experience is that they tend to be a little bit more prominent on the right than the left these days, although I guess we don't necessarily have to make a definitive calculation there. But either way, the political imperative here is not hidden. It's about stifling dissent, stifling protest, stifling speech, which we're told that these guys wanted to come in order to hold up as sacrosanct, according to RFK's incessant podcasting nonsense. And what did they do? They go well beyond the Biden administration, whose interventions into social media I do not defend at all. However, what the Trump administration has done is much more brash, much more sort of overt in how they don't even care to give a pretense for respecting the speech rights or the constitutional protections of the people that they want to use state power to penalize.
Ryan, a comment?
Yeah, I don't know what a Jewish
don't have to,
person
if
is.
you
Like
don't want
I mean, I don't know. And if they're white, or I'm Sicilian. Am I white? I have no idea. As far as what Michael said, protests against Israel began October 8th in New York City. I saw them with my own eyes. There were dead bodies still bleeding out in Israel, and there were still dozens of people being raped and tortured when the protests, pro-Palestinian protests, started in New York City. I understand the outrage now at this point in the war, but let's not pretend there were not a lot of people in this city celebrating dead Jews for the sake that they were dead Jews. It's just what it is. And I'm sorry, this is not a problem on the right. This is a problem on the left. This is a problem right now where there's a true, distinct hatred for Jewish people. And a lot of this has been fed by liberal Jews who sat there and perpetuated a lot of bad opinions of their own people. But there is a serious ongoing issue with people who genuinely just hate them, and there were dead bodies still bleeding out when it was happening. I don't, that's just what it is.
Okay, let's take the next question.
My question is to Ryan, and it's regarding the tariffs. I call them Schrodinger's tariffs because they exist and they are reshoring jobs while simultaneously they don't exist, and they're just a bargaining tool that we don't talk about reshoring jobs. Then it's to get better trade deals. And in the meantime, while we're establishing these trade deals, we're going back and forth. The markets swing back and forth. We're making deadlines that we're then refiguring out these deadlines, making new tariffs and everything. I'd like you to address Michael's point that we're just reading tea leaves here and we're creating volatility in the meantime.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of volatility because I don't think the administration has been very good at broadcasting their exact opinion. Are we trying to move to a more mercantile system? Are we trying to sit there and renegotiate current trade deals? There's obviously an attempt with a 10% across the cut tariff, which has increased. I think tariffs increased 75% year on year as far as what monetary money we're bringing in to the government as far as a tariff cost. There is a genuine tariff against China. That is an absolute thing going on right now, and I think that the Cold War between China and the United States is mounting up. When it comes to our allies, the people that the members of the Atlantic and the New York Times and Kara Swisher's podcast scream over and over, our allies in the European Union, they have massive tariffs over American goods. I don't know if you've ever been to England, but try to buy Hershey's chocolate in England. There's a massive tariff on our candy. There are tariffs on our essential items that we produce in this country, and you can't sit there and say, why would you possibly want to push these tariffs on what they've been doing for us for decades? I think that there is an unfairness waged upon our quote-unquote allies that we have sat there and taken for far too long, and at the same time, we are working towards both a better trade negotiations with our allies and punishing China, our global adversary, because if China does sit there and do something wild like invade Taiwan, we will be up Schitt's Creek without a paddle in a way that you cannot even imagine when we don't have chips when we can't produce chips. It only comes from one place predominantly, and that is Taiwan. I think we absolutely need to decimate the way that China has been using economic warfare against the United States. Everything else, I think, is table dressing, and there's a tariff on everywhere because Trump loves tariffs, period. But it's not destroying our economy.
Michael, would you like to come?
Yeah. So I don't know if you remember in that week after, quote, Liberation Day, when every conservative influencer in the land was deployed to start a lecture series that you were an out-of-touch elitist if you doubted the utility of the notion that the United States could reshore the manufacturing capacity in relation to like the garment industry or to produce sneakers or other such things that have been outsourced to places like Vietnam and Thailand over the years. And then just in the past week, Trump says, look, I don't really care that much about making t-shirts in the United States. So like within a matter of months, the thing that this whole coterie of people were sent out to argue vehemently in favor of, the president just decided that he was going to discard on a moment's notice. I want to give you a quick quote that I helpfully recorded here from Howard Lutnick, who's the Commerce Secretary. This was in the immediate aftermath of Liberation Day. April 2nd, he was on TV explaining the policy. He said, quote, "Let Donald Trump run the global economy. You gotta trust Donald Trump." That was his distillation of the nature of the policy. He wasn't giving us some treatise on protectionism. He was saying it's all subsumed into this like supernatural world historic negotiating prowess of Donald J. Trump, and we all have to take like a faith-based leap of faith, or we have to have the conviction that he's going to do right by us as our leader. I just feel like that's a bit of a condescending attitude toward national economic policy.
We have our first question from civil.com. Thank you very much. Is Trump's transactional view of international relationships compatible with long-term diplomacy? I think this question is for you, Ryan.
More so than the idea, a blanket ideology that democracy works across the world, which was the ideology of both the Bush and Obama administration. We certainly had more stability across the globe when we had authoritarians were basically buying off not to sit there and get terrorists into Europe and into America. Yeah, absolutely, it's more compatible.
Michael?
Well, the transactionalism is on full display. He goes to the Gulf potentates. He is greeted like some kind of savior figure with horses and swords and big ostentatious ceremonies. And we're all supposed to believe that this is some really inspiring departure from foreign policy consensus because what? He's taking lots of largesse from Saudi Arabia and Qatar? I don't really get it. Look, there might be some individual circumstances in which Trump's sort of non-ideological nature might open up opportunities for diplomatic contacts. I was very happy to essentially support or at least contest the critics' criticism of when, in the first term, he decided, look, we're going to have personal diplomacy with Kim Jong-un for the first time in history. But then what happened? They didn't actually adjust the underlying policy posture, and the negotiations or the succeeding summits fell apart. And we were told that Trump 2.0 would be radically different. He wouldn't have people like Waltz, who is just like the latest incarnation of Bolton. He certainly wouldn't have somebody like Marco Rubio, who was like neocon #1 in an earlier era, running the State Department and also the de facto national security advisor, because Trump had learned his lessons and he was finally going to shed these neocon constraints that unfortunately beset him in the first term. I don't see much evidence that that's happening.
All right, thank you. Next question.
Yes. What's really nice about this debate is it seems you two are not quite as far as a lot of the other debates on your, and I think that's really good. But someone has to win the equivalent of the Tootsie Roll. So, so I hope this will clarify things. So Ryan, to you, do you really believe that Trump cares about civil? I'm not talking about one particular civil liberty, or everyone has their own pet issues, but do you think he really is a civil libertarian, fights for civil liberties, or he's just better than, not, or I should say, not as bad as the other presidents? And Michael, you talked about how we talked about Miriam Allison. He's got tremendous pressure on him. Trump does on all sides, or several sides. Do you think, is Trump in any way different from the other presidents, like markedly different in a good way for, that advances, the what we're talking about here for
Thank you very
American
much.
people?
Ryan, you can start.
That's a great question. That's the question of, is Trump a passionate ideologue on many things? I mean, tariffs, I think immigration, but I don't know if Donald Trump ever read John Locke, or if he's ever had a big conversation over the ideology of civil liberties. However, on a guttural instinct, Donald Trump does not approach the positions of gay rights, abortion rights, of veterans not taking a shot, of a multitude of issues on discrimination from the perspective of a pure ideology. That is something that is refreshing, because it is conditional to where most American people are. And as I work in political consulting most of the time, I worked for many races, and fairness is an American ethos, right? We believe in the idea of fairness. So that is where Donald Trump's ethos has been. Now, not perfect, not 100% of the time, not the ideal man, but we don't live in the ideal world. So on the conditions of, is he better than people in past administrations who have point blank pursued an authority vis-a-vis the executive government, the federal government, to control how we operate our lives? No, President Trump absolutely is a better civil libertarian on those issues. Is he, could he write a treatise on us? Could he write a paper on it? Probably not, but we're not looking for that as a president.
I have to say, the notion that Donald Trump is a committed civil libertarian really made me laugh during the opening statement, just because it's like so incongruous with what everybody can just plainly observe of Donald Trump. Not that he's looking to necessarily crush every civil liberty that he possibly can just for the sake of it, but the idea that he is at all cognizant of like civil libertarian ethos seems to me not at all viable. So is he different than past presidents? Yes, he has a much different rhetorical style. He probably won the Republican primary in 2016 because he mastered the art of Twitter, now X, and he could send out pithy, humorous statements that the entire media would scramble to cover at a moment's notice, and he commanded the news cycle at will. So I'm not denying at all that he's a media genius, as evidenced by his career history in reality television, and that does indicate something that is new and different, just in terms about how he conducts the bully pulpit of the presidency. Obviously, Biden was in no position to like go around sort of hamming it up and rattling off snarky sort of riposte to people. However, like, look at the first Trump administration and tell me what exactly was so revolutionary in his departure from prior administrations. Was it like attempting to do regime change in Venezuela? Was it like doing corporate tax cuts that the Republicans put all their political capital in and are doing a variation of that as we now speak with the big beautiful bill that Trump is himself pushing and exploding the national debt, and only you have like one guy or two like Rand Paul and Thomas Massie saying, look, hey, I thought we all pretended to be fiscal conservatives for like 2 seconds, which we do literally every election cycle, so that people will think we're going to be responsible stewards of the public trust. I just don't see that much different on a policy level, with a few exceptions here and there. North Korea and the diplomatic contacts I cited. But then again, Trump's predecessor, Barack Obama, opened up the diplomatic ties with Cuba. Trump closed them. Obama did an Iran deal and had direct contacts through his administration with that regime for the first time since 1979, which was a big departure. And we're not really having debates about how Barack Obama was this huge breath of fresh air, and like everything that preceded him was in this distant, anachronistic past. So I think there's some weird double standards that get applied when analyzing what Trump actually does.
Thank you. We're about running out of time, so let's take a couple of quick questions, but keep them as brief as you can.
So this is a question to Ryan. Currently, the national debt exceeds $36 trillion, and this year we're paying almost $1 trillion just in interest payments alone. That's $1 trillion of hardworking American taxpayer money that doesn't fix roads or fund healthcare or build infrastructure. It simply enriches private creditors. And meanwhile, we're running a $1.9 trillion budget deficit this year, meaning we're borrowing even more and compounding these interest payments with even higher interest rates nowadays. So this problem is accelerating. How does an agenda that takes $1 trillion every year from hardworking Americans to enrich private creditors while also adding $1.9 trillion more to the debt represent prosperity for the American people?
That's a great question. So the 1.9 trillion was the last year under President Biden, not under President Trump.
We're estimating this year will also
That's
be
an
1.9.
estimation, but that does not include increased money brought in from the tariffs. That does not include what the actual reconciliation bill will include. President Trump notably went to the Congress 3 different occasions during this term, 7 last term, asking to close the earned interest loophole, asking to create a millionaire's tax for people who make $2.5 million per individual, $5 million per couple. It was the Republican Congress that rejected those things. So if President Trump had the authority of a king, I'd sit there and say, wow, you have such a great point. He could have sat there and fought for this budget and made it even. I don't think you would get Democrats to cut any part of the federal government aside from DOGE, which is not even in the federal government. And Republicans, they won't do it either. That is the problem right now with Congress. Congress has allocated most of their rules to federal power. Federal power is too large the executive power is too large, but the executive power has no ability to sit there and cut the spending. So I agree with you. I wish the Republicans would have went for President Trump's agenda to close it, carried interest loophole, to increase taxes on millionaires. People make $2.5 million as an individual, $5 million as a couple, which he went there 3 times to ask for. But they didn't. And that's the problem of congressional Republicans, and congressional Democrats refuse to even come to the table to have a conversation about it.
Yeah, I'll be quick. Ryan, you know that Donald Trump has an extraordinarily potent bully pulpit. He can pick and choose winners of Republican primary races as he pleases. So if he prioritized this return to fiscal sanity or fiscal responsibility that a lot of people want to impute to him as something that he deep down wishes he could do but just can't because of some ill-defined political hurdle, he could do that. He has chosen not to because they did something really politically clever with this incoming administration, which is Elon Musk gives, like, what was it, $300 million. Nobody thinks that that's like any kind of troubling thing in terms of oligarchic control of U.S. politics. But anyway, he gets to like kind of run the government or play act as running the government through this Doge enterprise. And then once the actual budget comes out, like once the rubber hits the road and the appropriators in the Congress have to put up or shut up with the budget, Doge is just like a total irrelevancy. It was obviously something to distract people with these little shiny nuggets that they uncovered. When, if you go back to Barack Obama, George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, they all came in doing this routine where they wanted to modernize and introduce technological innovation to the government, and that was supposed to save a lot of money. They did a new variation of that this time, but because Elon Musk is this outsized figure and we're dismantling the deep state, blah, 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 people assigned way too much significance to it. And don't take my word for it. Read the bill that Trump himself is pushing for and demanding that Republicans fall into line to support, because it has nothing to do with what people were enticed to believing about Doge.
I want to take the 26 seconds I turned up before.
Go ahead, take it.
Because that is absolutely not the truth. President Trump offered a bill, pushed a bill to sit there and have paid maternity leave. Congressional Republicans turned it down. Reduce H-1Bs. Congressional Republicans turned it down. Reduce H-2Bs. Congressional Republicans turned it down. Taxes on millionaires. Congressional Republicans turned it down. Close interest loopholes. 8 times they turned it down. President Trump does not have the ability of a king. I know that that's what you hear from social media. That is not true. Congressional Republicans many times do their own thing.
26.
Who work on campaigns.
That is
All right, folks, listen, we're running behind a little bit on time, so we have one more question on civil and 3 more questions here. We'll read them out, and hopefully you will address them in your closing statements. How does that work? So maybe take notes. Everyone's awake. How about you take some notes on your phones if you can. So the one question that is coming from civil, thank you for 9,000 people watching online on civil. If Trump had one civil libertarian bone in his body, why would he be going after Thomas Massie, the only civil libertarian in Congress? And then can we have the last 3 questions, but very quickly, and they will try to address your questions in their closing remarks. Please take it away.
Okay, so this question, I guess, is mostly for Ryan, but it can be for both of you. It's clear that Congress is bought and paid for by the banks. Trump won twice, honestly, probably 3 times, propelled to power by the MAGA blue-collar workers. MAGA is the default now, but is Trump really the representative of MAGA? How can we have an America First policy when it's clear that the America First brand is still run by banks and not we, the people?
Thank you. Next one.
This question is also mostly for Ryan, but it can be for both.
Go ahead.
Okay, so you mentioned about the campus situation during October 7th that a lot of the people were praising what's called Hamas or whatever happened with killing people, right? So that's all fine and dandy, but that's still in some form or sense free speech. Unless they were actually inciting violence. So do you think that was called that's still justifiable for Trump to go after people for speech?
Thank you. And the final question from Benito, please.
Hey guys, thanks for a great debate. Question for both of you. What do you each see as the benefit and the cost of protectionist policy?
Okay, awesome. Thank you very much for the questions. Thank you for everyone watching online. And at this point, we'll take it away to the closing remarks. Ryan, you have the stage, 5 minutes.
Okay, great. I'm still writing down the questions. Okay, so first on Thomas Massie, I ran Thomas Massie's first super PAC to help get him elected. Very proud of Thomas Massie and all he does. I think that they have a bone of contention over a number of policies and Massie's willingness to sit there and be a voice of opposition, whether Trump likes it or not. And it's not just against Trump. It's a million people that Massie has waved his own flag. He's kind of like Ron Paul. And I don't know if anyone will be able to defeat him in the future because he's special in that congressional seat. But I just think they don't like each other. I mean, just put it short. Is the America First a brand run by banks? Such a great question. So here's the way it works. As somebody who works on campaigns, has worked on Shady Vance's and Thomas Massie's and a million other, Brandon Gill's. No, it's not run by banks, right? It's not like they have an endless series of caches. Most congressional seats are won because most seats are in non-competitive districts. Most are won in primaries for less than $1 million on the whole. What they're usually run by is just when you get into the minutia of Washington, D.C. When you get to be one of 435 or one of 100, you have very little ability within yourself, and there is a hive mind mentality among many things. Also, the people running for Congress generally believe most of those things. They believe most of those things. They are divorced from their constituents, from the working class constituents, because working class people, which is true in America, it's true in the UK, it's true all across Europe, the working class people don't run for office. They don't create political revolutions. It is a revolution of the wealthy. My screensaver went up. Okay, benefit of protectionist policies. If we can sit there, perfect example was what happened with U.S. Steel right now. U.S. Steel, the original policies under the Biden administration was far worse than the $14 billion dollars that President Trump was able to renegotiate to hire 100,000 people opening a new steel mill. Protectionist policies are the ideas that were championed throughout the entire early part of the 20th century under Ronald Reagan, who every open-minded neoconservative, traditional Republican stalwarts, Ronald Reagan used protectionist policies to save American motorcycles. I mean, we were going to go under from Japan, and Harley Davidson was saved because President Reagan issued protectionist policies on Japanese motor vehicles, on Japanese motorcycles. We've seen successes that happen, period. The idea that there is never any point where any government intervention has ever been used for the benefit of the overall public is just not true. It's not true in our own history. Barry Goldwater, probably the most libertarian senator that was elected in the 20th century in this country, lived in a state that was developed and built by government intervention. Our rocket policy, our nuclear policy, everything was built because of engineering by the government. The internet, which we are streaming on, was created by the government. There are good things that it can do. It doesn't mean it's always good. It doesn't mean mass intervention is good. But sure, intervention sometimes does work out, right? It does work out in some cases. I want to get to my closing statement, which is this. Michael makes some very compelling arguments, and I understand a lot of where he comes from. However, Michael lives in the world of his ideal and not the world as we see it, which is immensely complicated with many moving parts. We are not going to get in a position, I think, probably ever where an administration will make him happy because he needs to take the side that is in the opposition. It's part of, I understand I'm from the tri-state area too. But the truth of the matter is where we are going from where we came from, both if you're a Republican as a party and both people as a nation. Working class people in this country elected the most radical candidate possible 2 of the 3 times he ran for office, gave him the nomination all 3 times, in very large margins, because they are truly suffering with the ideas. If we can sit there and get to a place where where we're no longer the Republican Party that rewards illegality of people coming across the country, that actually sits there and stops the greatest transnational organization to kill Americans, even surpassing the Civil War, if we can bring medicine to be produced in this country where if we have another COVID-like pandemic, we can get baby Tylenol or baby aspirin at the grocery store, if we can get the most basic functions of human civilization, because we believe in ourselves as a nation to do that, that is by the America First agenda, that is by the leadership of President Donald Trump. It is not a perfect leadership, he's not a perfect man, but I'm not looking for perfection. I'm looking for a way forward to create a working nation that believes in itself. Thank you so much.
Michael, your 5 minutes closing.
So, run through the questions and then give my own closing statement, right? Okay, so why does Trump have it out for Thomas Massie? Not a big mystery. Thomas Massie is an extreme outlier in Congress, probably representing something like 0.05% of anybody who's ever served in Congress, in that he has an independent political constituency. He has actual principles he adheres to, whether or not you might agree with them, and he's not a total party hack. So, of course, that's going to run afoul of the kingpin of the Republican Party at present, who is Donald J. Trump, who is pushing measures that Massie could never in good conscience support, because if he did, it would show him to be a total fraud as to the national debt or as to other issues around which he actually does have a genuine conviction. So, Trump called for Massie to be primaried in 2020 because he didn't vote for the COVID bailout, and they seem to have some sort of meeting of the minds or buried the hatchet slightly, and now he's calling for him to be primaried again because he's voting against these budget bills. So it's simple. Trump is in charge of the partisan direction of the current Republican Party, and if anybody slights him in that respect, they are thrown out the door. Somebody asked, do you think that praising Hamas, this was directed at Ryan, but I'll just address it briefly, do you think praising Hamas would make it justifiable for the speech of the person who was praising Hamas to be penalized by the state, whether criminally or otherwise? Well, the Trump administration and many other Republicans, including Ron DeSantis, who is also the hero of lots of people who think that they're doing something radical politically, decided that what they would do after October 7th is start fabricating claims that by even praising Hamas, saying something that could be construed as favorable toward Hamas, you were providing material support to Hamas and therefore subject to criminal penalty under statutes that make unlawful providing material support to, quote, terrorist groups. And it gets back to the immigration point, which is that, again, you can favor restrictionist immigration policy, but if that's going to be part and parcel with unilaterally decreeing that vast new categories of persons are now terrorists because the president, totally on his own volition, with no checks and balances, decided so, then I think that might be a bit of an impediment as to actually implementing an immigration policy in a rational way, and does harken back to the dark ages of the George Bush and Dick Cheney administration, which we were all told were being repudiated by the new right as manifested by the Trump 2.0 team. Cost benefits of protectionist policies. Look, I've never claimed to be any kind of economist or somebody who makes studying protectionism one of my main pursuits in life. However, I do want to quote from, handily enough, Rand Paul, who said, quote, "The tariffs are simply imposed by presidential fiat, by proclamation, governed by one person who assumes all power by asserting a so-called emergency is the antithesis of a constitutional government." So I can be agnostic about the efficacy of tariffs, but if they're going to be implemented by ginning up a bogus emergency so that one man with no checks and balances whatsoever can decide with total caprice that he's going to stick, I don't know, Madagascar with 130% tariffs for no particular discernible reason, then I find myself a little wary. And to conclude, in his 2024 campaign announcement speech, Trump said that if he were given a second term, he would, quote, dismantle the deep state. Wow, sounds great. What's he doing? He's celebrating that we're going to have, for the first time, $1 trillion military budgets, which I guarantee you is meant to subsidize the very deep state that he maligns for political reasons, as do his supporters, while they do nothing but entrench and empower it. He marketed himself as a candidate of peace. That's what J.D. Vance said, direct quote, which is usually what Americans tend to want, but he's currently fueling the annihilation rampage of a fanatical messianic government in the Middle East. And like I've been saying quite often, he said he wants to restore free speech, and then he proceeded to launch a relentless campaign to punish disfavored speech. Now, it's true, in closing, that when Trump first won in 2016, he did so by overthrowing the two prevailing political dynasties in the United States, the Bushes and the Clintons. He also overturned a lot of conventional wisdom as to who could win the presidency.
Michael, that's time.
One last sentence?
One last sentence.
This was a historically unique opportunity to actually bring the prosperity potential that we're talking about. However, I think as I've established, the reality has been a little bit more complicated.
All right, thank you very much, both of you. All right, now folks, whip out your phones once more and scan this QR code, and now give us your opinion, your vote on the post-debate resolution. Does Trump's America First agenda advance the prosperity, national security, and civil liberties of the American people? Think of the arguments you've heard and scan this QR code. Give us your vote one last time. As you do so, our lovely Gene Epstein will come to the stage, or the floorboard here, and he will make some announcements about Soho Forum debates.
First of all, I want to thank my pal Heck for putting on yet another stimulating debate. Briefly, I guess I want to plug the fact that on Thursday, June 19th, I'm going to do something different with my Soho Forum. It's going to be a debate about history, but the past is never gone. It's not even past, as William Faulkner said. It's going to be a debate about that thing called the Cold War. There is a guy, one of my debaters, who's coming out with a book called The Cold War as a Deception and How It Haunts Us Today. Opposing him will be one of the most prominent defenders of America's role in that thing called the Cold War, which supposedly lasted from the late 1940s to 1991, but in the opinion of this revisionist, still haunts us today. So a debate about an important element of history with which we're still living on June 19th. And again, the second mission of my Soul Forum is always to have an after party, to get together. People come over to our loft apartment. My wife serves delicious food. That starts at around 8:30. By 11:30, I'm asking the people who remain to take it to an all-night bar because we have a lot of fun, and the debaters also come to the parties, so you get a chance to talk to them as well and to establish friendship, community, and mutual interest in topics that matter to us. So that's June 19th. I can shut up now because you.
Tell them about the Glenn
Oh, okay. So good. I don't need to talk about the Glenn Greenwald debate because that's going to sell out no matter what. Look up thesohoforum.org, thesohoforum.org, and you'll find the Glenn Greenwald debate listed for August. The other part is we just had a debate with Dave Smith versus Alex and Rasta on immigration, and it was a sold-out crowd. It's had an enormous number of views. It's on the issue of immigration, a very divisive issue between libertarians, and it was an incredible evening. It's preserved, as are all our debates, on video and on podcast. Go to thesoulforum.org to view that debate that took place just last week. The debate on immigration between Dave Smith and Alex and Rasta. A great clash of views. And now I should shut up.
Okay. Thank you very much, Gene. All right, folks, I have the results here. So we'll first go through the first question about American prosperity. The change in percentage goes for the proposition with 10% change towards Ryan's position. Congratulations there. As it comes for the question of national security, the change also goes to proposition to Ryan. Congratulations. And finally, civil liberties. It goes to Michael Tracey, the opposition. But that means that you have won, Ryan Girdusky. The proposition wins this debate. Thank you very much, and thank you all. Ladies and gents, this concludes our debate. Thank you so much for attending here in person, and those who watch, all 10,000 of you who watch on civil.com. And at this point, those who are here, please stick around for the reception and an opportunity to engage with our two excellent debaters. And those who are at home, have a lovely night. Thank you very much.